Tonight's topic is short and sweet, is a very deep concept though. I want to talk to you about the idea of controlling your sphere of influence, and I literally mean your physical sphere of influence. You see in the martial arts, and generally speaking in crisis survival, and really honestly in the acquisition and use of any skill, there's this idea of you have a sphere of things that you can control. And anything outside of that sphere is something you probably don't need to be worrying about. In cooking, they call it mise en place, right? I'm terrible with French, I don't speak French, but it literally means everything in its place. The idea is that everything should be set up to the point where you can just grab and go with your cooking and be done with it. Have everything set up beforehand, know your sphere of control, your sphere of influence, and that way everything is efficiently moving along and working. Well, within that idea, you also have this in martial arts. You know, with what you can and can't control, I want you to start thinking in terms of distance from your center. You know, we'll use the center line, and you've actually got a couple of center lines, but for right now, we're going to consider a line as if you were on a merry-go-round or a victim of Vlad the Impaler, and you've got a pole running through you, crown to asshole, and that's your center line. It's pretty much the line where the majority of your vital organs are, and it's the most important line to control. It also happens to be the line where all of your points of power and stability kind of gel together. It's also the source of your power. It's where your hip shift comes from. It's where your sinking comes from. It's an incredibly important line. But what radiates out from that? I'm tongue-tying myself. Obviously, your arms, your feet, your head radiate out from that. And so, within your sphere of influence, in any direction that your hands and feet can move is kind of your sphere of influence. If you have to start leaning and sacrificing your stable structure, then you're kind of starting to reach outside of your sphere of influence. It's kind of a gray zone if you're looking at things in black and white. It's kind of a gray area where you can kind of push it if the timing is right, but it's not recommended. Generally speaking, if you have to reach further than your structure will allow, then that means you should actually probably move instead of leaning and reaching. So that being the case, I want you to think of, at the very furthest points, your fingertips and your toes as the very distal, the furthest points of your sphere of influence. As we bring it in, your sphere of influence, your sphere of effective influence really, is going to be the range at which you can effectively throw a strike with sufficient compression and power. It's also going to be the range where you can effectively grab and pull somebody in. You can't grapple unless you can grab correctly. And grabbing, I'm using loosely. It doesn't mean you have to grab with your fingers. It could, I mean, there are many grappling maneuvers that don't involve your fingers. But just in simple terms, I need to be able to get 2 to 3 inches minimum of compression with a strike for it to be an effective strike. I need to be able to grab for my grappling range to start coming into effect. So really, we're looking at taking from fingertips down to about where your wrist is. And even that is pushing the limits of your effective range. So then we're going to bring it down into, say, forearms and elbows. Now I can start using those hands-free grappling maneuvers. I can start using short-range strikes, short chain striking power, elbows, knees, headbutts if it's not against your rules in your sport or against your code of honor or whatever. That's where your range starts getting good. That's where your range starts getting versatile. if you have to control things out here at this range, you're going to end up wasting a lot of motion. Think of it this way. If an attack is coming in and I'm controlling at this range, if it veers off course a little bit, I have to make this big sweeping motion to get across, and move into a line of safety, correct? So as we bring it in, the radius gets a little smaller. So now when I'm here, if I have to move something off my center line, it's just a short motion, right? The smaller we can make the circle, the better. You remember that scene in Zorro? Was it the Mask of Zorro or the Legend of Zorro or something like that, where Anthony Hopkins, it's the Mask of Zorro, where Anthony Hopkins points to the pendant with the 3 circles on it, and he's like, you're here, and now, as your training progresses, you move here and here. Well, that's the same idea. You bring it in until your circle gets smaller and smaller. You want to bring it in until your sphere of influence is actually very small, so that you're not overreacting to the tiniest of things coming into your space bubble, right? There's a big thing at the end of the 90s. Everybody had their personal bubble, and don't get within my personal bubble, this is my space. Well, okay, but you should be getting to the point where you're comfortable with people rubbing elbows with you and it doesn't freak you out, because you have to be able to control yourself and objects around you at that close of a range. See, martial arts becomes more effective at the closer range. It becomes harder to defend against at the closer range. You have to get good at infighting. Ranged fighting is for amateurs. Infighting is where it's at. And so eventually you get down to the point where you only react to the things which literally are going to be in range, which are online. And you get to the point where a miss that zings by your face is still good enough of a miss. And you don't have this ego attack when something almost hits you. It didn't hit you, right? So I'm asking right a lot. This is odd for me. But whether something almost hit you or missed you by a mile, it shouldn't matter. As a martial artist and as somebody who cares about crisis response and emergency preparedness, you have to be able to deal with things whizzing by you and not flipping out and overreacting. Because the more you flip out and react, the less control you have over yourself and the less likely you are to be able to control yourself when something gets closer. So start getting used to this idea of bringing your sphere of influence in. Maintain that space bubble and understand that you can control stuff out at this range, but also that you need to be able to control stuff at the near touching range, because those are the critical centimeters, the critical millimeters. If something hits me and it just makes surface contact, it's not going to do any damage. I need to not go into flying out rage mode because something just touched me. I need to be able to read the energy of the attack and read the trajectory of the attack to the point where it's not a big deal. If it's not in sufficient range, don't worry about it. That's all I got for you. I'm just going to leave you on that, and I'll talk to you next time. Good journey.